today we're going to be talking about purple prose. I'm kind of excited to finally tackle this topic. Let's define it for the class. In literary criticism, purple prose is overly ornate prose text that may disrupt a narrative flow by drawing undesirable attention to its own extravagant style of writing, thereby diminishing the appreciation of the prose overall. It's characterized by the excessive use of adjectives, adverbs, and metaphors. I, over the years, have done a lot of self-reflection on what does it mean to write purple prose. And while I do think that there is a level of objectivity to it, like I think if you like Google examples of purple prose, there are some that are like, okay, yeah, that seems like it might be doing a little bit too much. We go into some examples right now. In WikiHow, there's this example. The proliferation of thoughts in my mind was causing me to experience brain freeze. I'm not gonna say that no one actually writes like this, but I do think that if someone is writing like this, they're probably just new to writing. We usually shake the purple prose out of our systems a little bit. In general, purple prose is so convoluted in its wording that it's either not saying anything or whatever it is saying is the significance and the meaning of it is lost. I do think that everyone has kind of their own bar for what is considered too purple. Again, while there is definitely a level of objectivity, if you were to look at an incredibly convoluted sentence that can be simplified, if you're getting into the real nitty-gritty of things, I do think there comes a point where your personal taste in writing will play a factor in it, because a lot of the times there are some passages that some writers, some readers might really resonate with. They might find it particularly profound, or they might just really like the imagery, but then another reader could read the same passage and be like, thesaurus.com, you know what I mean? So that's why I think that there is this like fine line when it comes to personal taste, bias, life experiences. Not everyone is going to come into a piece of work with the exact same mindset. And I think that's where the subjectivity comes into play. If it sounds like I am defending purple prose a little bit, it's kind of because I am. Let me make a distinction first. I'm not defending using incredibly convoluted sentences in your writing. What I am defending, it is okay to like writing in a somewhat flowery and ornate way. On this note, I just wanted to quickly jump in, add a few more points because I forgot to mention them. Prompted me to actually make this video in the first place is that I feel like I've been seeing this advice pop up every once in a while over the past year or so. I don't know if it's just my algorithm, but I was kind of shocked at the frequency at which I was like seeing this advice. Don't try to write well, or like don't try to write pretty. Stop trying to sound flowery. It's actually really bad to write that way. I feel like it's important to mention that whether you have a more terse, minimal writing style or a more flowery writing style, one isn't inherently better than the other. It's all about execution. And I honestly feel like it's a little bit harmful, especially to new writers, to make blanket statement kind of writing advice. Because I think when writers haven't, figured out their writing style, they tend to be very susceptible to just kind of listening to whatever opinion floats their way. So similarly, I am not making the blanket statement, all writers should try to write this way, or that flowery writing is the only good way to write, or it's like inherently better than another writing style. For people who do enjoy flowery language, and if it's something that gets you excited about writing, don't let anyone tell you that you shouldn't be writing that way. These are just tips that have worked for me to like mitigate purple prose, and also just to let you know that write the way that A, makes you happy, and B, fits the tone of your work. For some projects, flowery language is probably not the best choice. A lot of writers and readers want to just like focus on the events, the external plot, and like what is happening. Writing a whole book with an incredibly ornate
writing style with like metaphors out the wazoo, it probably won't fit the tone of that work. You might also be writing a narrator where that's just like not in the character's personality to like be super introspective. And I think one thing that does exacerbate purple prose is when the writing gets dramatic out of nowhere, like for no reason. And the last thing that I want to mention, writing flowery without sounding purple is definitely a more advanced writing skill set. You know, writing good flowery language is kind of like, you can't really tackle that until you've mastered the basics, you know? It takes time, it's okay. Eventually, you'll develop your own personal intuition for what actually sounds good and what you like and all that.
I think over the past few years, I've definitely warmed up to this writing style. A lot of the times when I'm like writing stories and I'm falling into a particular character voice that I feel is a little bit more flowery, I almost feel like the process of finding the perfect sentence, the perfect metaphor, the perfect passage, it feels almost like a problem solving exercise to me. Like that's what I enjoy out of writing, is like digging and creating these whole scenes where you can sort of earn your flowery, ornate writing. I do feel as though there are people who really don't like flowery writing, and so they're kind of like turned off by it. And so I do think there comes a point where there's almost a fine line between what is melodramatic versus what is poetic. And so sometimes it can leave writers in this kind of weird, if you haven't kind of figured out your writing style, or if you're new to writing, sometimes you're like, I don't know if what I'm writing is melodramatic or if it's poetic. I have days where I will write something that one day feels like the best thing I've ever written, and then 3 weeks later I'm like, what the heck was I saying? And it's okay to experience that, you know. A lot of the times, even when you're reading a piece of work, like it might seem more melodramatic than it is out of context. It might also depend on your mood and like how you're feeling that day. There's really going to be no objective opinion on what is too purple, what is too much, what is melodramatic, what is super profound, you know? And so what I will say is that if you are a writer who you feel like you are really a writer because there is something about the language itself that is exciting to you, I hope that don't try to like dampen your flowery writing just because you're worried about something like, oh my gosh, is it going to sound too melodramatic? I have been reflecting a lot on flowery writing. The work that I'm working on right now is incredibly flowery. I think flowery writing is really, really fun. I think it's probably the part of writing that most excites me. The challenge of prose itself that just feels like when you're navigating towards the right image or the right metaphor, it feels so rewarding when you're able to like really stick the landing on a description, on a character emotion. It is definitely the part of writing that I feel the most fulfilled by. Let's say you've written a metaphor and you're like, is this a really good metaphor? Does it suck? Am I doing the right thing? The very, very first question you should ask yourself if you're worried about purple prose is, does it make sense? If you are reading this, do you think someone could understand what you're trying to say? You as a writer, this is where you 100% need a beta reader if you're like if you really want to know. But if even you as the writer, if you read back the sentence and you get kind of tripped up on it, chances are that a reader might also get tripped up on it because they won't know what you're saying. You have to make sure that the sentence flows, that there aren't words that are contradicting themselves, that the images or the metaphors aren't overlapping. I mean, I'm always going to defend a run-on sentence. Like, I'm sorry, but I like my run-on sentences. But there comes a point where you probably need to put a punctuation in there, a comma, a period. The other thing that's like that you can also look out for is like, have you like layered too many adjectives and adverbs next to each other to the point where the adjectives and the adverbs are kind of like canceling each other out? You know what I mean? So yeah, that's the first thing. Does it make sense? Is it comprehensible? The next thing that I will say is cut out redundancies. I do this a lot in my writing. Once I figure out like, oh, this is like the metaphor that I'm going for, this is the language that I'm going for, I might repeat the same imagery in different words. And so usually what happens is like, I read it back a day later, a week later, a month later, and I'm like, oh, I don't need to have both of these descriptions in the same metaphor because they're kind of saying the same thing. So I might as well just pick one and make the one much stronger. Long does not necessarily equal bad. You could have a long passage, a long metaphor, and it can still be really, really good. With that said, though, I think it's important to make sure that you're picking the right words versus picking the most words. And that part of that comes with making sure that you're cutting out redundancies, making sure that you're not layering too many conflicting descriptors and adjectives and adverbs on top of each other. And then the last thing that I will say, and I think that this is crucial. It's going to sound very, very basic, but know what you are trying to say and hone in on that sentiment. For me, whenever I'm like trying to craft a metaphor or whenever I'm using figurative language, I always have to stop myself and ask myself, okay, what is the point of this? Because sometimes, and it's perfectly okay if you kind of like get lost in your own writing and you start kind of writing nonsense, because I think part of that is a discovery process, and it's totally okay to do that on your first few drafts, on your first few pass-throughs. However, part of where things can get a little purple is if you start a metaphor but you're not 100% sure like what the purpose of it is. Once you know exactly the kind of beat that you're trying to hit with the metaphor, like what is going through the narrator's head, how are they like actually feeling, like what is the precise emotion that you're trying to get through. Once you really, really know that, it is then easier for you to pick stronger words that will get that emotion across more tangibly. So now that I've gone through all of that, I want to go through some examples. I'm going to be going through my own writing. However, before I get into my own writing, I want to talk about everyone's favorite purple prose man, F. Scott Fitzgerald. It pains me a little to call his writing purple prose because to me, it is not purple. To a lot of people, it is purple. There are so many people do not jive with Fitzgerald's writing, and I understand why. This man cannot finish a sentence to save his life, and I love it. Like, I'm so into it. I'm sorry, but I'm so into it. And as I've been reading a lot of his work this year, I've just, I have grown a deep appreciation for a writer who just lets himself cook. Like, he is going off. Fitzgerald has this, way of writing that he picks very unexpected words. The mixture of words that he's able to use, it creates such unexpected imagery and such a clashing of sensations. So interesting to me. Let me just read this one passage that I was just rereading this morning. This happens towards the end of the book, and this is a description of Daisy's character. For Daisy was young, and her artificial world was redolent of orchids and pleasant, cheerful snobbery, and orchestras which set the rhythm of the year, summing up the sadness and suggestiveness of life in new tunes. All night the saxophones wailed the hopeless comment of the Beale Street Blues, while 100 pairs of golden and silver slippers shuffled the shining dust. At the gray tea hour, there were always rooms that throbbed incessantly with this low, sweet fever, while fresh faces drifted here and there like rose petals, blown by the sad horns around the floor. The reason that I really, really love studying Fitzgerald, it's just that skill that he has. It's such a magic that is suffused in the prose. I mean, the orchestra's setting the rhythm of the year, summing up the sadness and suggestiveness of life in new tunes, the saxophones wailing the hopeless comment of the Beale Street Blues. Whenever he introduces a metaphor, in this case, music, he carries it throughout the passage. So it feels like you have this through line, you have this anchor, sort of grounds the image in something tangible. Instead of saying, this is the music that was playing, this is the song, the Beale Street Blues, he calls it a hopeless comment. This man I can't. And instead of saying something like crowds of men and women dancing, it is described as 100 pairs of golden and silver slippers shuffled the shining dust. And instead of saying afternoon, he says at the gray tea hour. And instead of saying busy, he says rooms that were throbbing incessantly with this low, sweet fever. Like, do you understand what I mean? Okay, I'm done talking about Gatsby. It was like something that really stuck out to me when I was rereading the book this year. I think studying Fitzgerald's writing has been just like a really interesting writing exercise for me. It makes me think a lot more deeply about how a sentence is constructed and like what is the anatomy of a good sentence. Like, how do you create those images that really just feel beautiful and that kind of are able to put into writing very complex atmospheres and emotions. A woman getting like swept up into this kind of like class of society that a man like Gatsby could never even dream to be a part of. Anyways, I'm done talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald. Let's take a look at my own writing because I think it'll be another interesting exercise to look at. Now let us talk about some purple prose. Bear with me here. This passage is going to be very long. I've included the whole thing. And this passage is in the perspective of a character named Nico. He's kind of having this like internal monologue himself and about his relationship with his sister and about the ways that they're kind of different from each other. Both him and his sister are musicians. So yeah, let's look at draft 1 of this passage. Jasmine had always been different from him, and in a way, Nico envied her brightness and the audacity of the things she dared to want. Not just distant hypotheticals, but beliefs, things that spilled beyond the borders of Lammas and at times seemed to Nico like nothing short of the sun itself. In the clubs, she commanded the stage, even when they weren't hers to command, and it annoyed the Ellerin musicians when she wandered from the strict path of their sheet music. But who could complain when she turned crowds the way she did, like flowers thirsting for light, for warmth? Nico had in fact thought himself immune to such things, the lure of cheap pleasure. He could recognize it the way a jeweler might know diamonds from glass. He was a La Grande baby, after all. If liquor-flushed women threw him a well-timed smile in the middle of a set, he had no desire to smile back. And men, well, those ones didn't smile so much as glance with meaningful furtiveness, and few really acted upon it for Nico to pay it any mind. Still, those airless clubs had a way about them, that acidic delight, the kind that eroded inhibitions so slowly you didn't notice until you were sitting in the dust of your own mistakes. So Nico wasn't immune, as he had learned the hard way. Like those clinging memories of his mother smiling at him so peacefully and ready for death. Nico's mistakes haunted him with the same translucence, the heady, erotic sense of La Grande, or his father's elegantly solemn face, or golden glazed hair catching the first rays of daybreak on a stolen morning, glowing with sleepy joy and half-remembered dreams. Okay. That's a lot. Some context may be missing. La Grande is a brothel, and this character Nico is technically a brothel baby. So, and his personality is that he is the more like serious, responsible one between him and his sister. Those are the kinds of things that he's reflecting on. So there's a lot in there, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different metaphors that have been tucked in there. The other thing that I really did not like about this first draft, and I remember when I was even writing the first draft, I was like, this is going to be placeholder because I don't like this. That's the other thing you should feel comfortable doing is like, it's okay if you just want to like put a placeholder metaphor in there. So that line where Jasmine, his sister, is likened to a flower that is thirsting for light, and familiar phrasing, like you kind of see that metaphor a lot. So that's the one thing that I also was, when I was like picking this apart, I was like, I don't know about that. And then the sort of main metaphor that I was going for here, I remember when I was like originally writing it, was this idea of like, Nico having been a brothel baby, having spent probably the first like few childhood years of his life in a brothel setting, has made him very aware of like the cheapness of pleasure. And as an adult, that's what makes him very wary. And this whole passage, it leads up to this reveal that he has had an ex-lover who revealed to kind of be like an antagonistic character, and they fell out on bad terms. And so it's like the one time that Nico allowed himself to be like tempted or swayed by this person, it ended up badly. This person ended up being like kind of betraying him. Metaphor that I was trying to go for here was that Nico is someone who like can sort of see through the hollowness of people's like temptations, basically. And so that makes him a very careful person. I likened his ability to like see through that guise as like a jeweler recognizing like counterfeit glass. I think I ended up changing that in the rewrite, which I'll show you. Yeah, I think overall it's like the ideas that I wanted were in here, and for the most part they are still in the revised version, but what I did was I kind of tried to clean up the phrasing so that it's a little more easy to follow. This one starts out with the memory of his mother's death, so there's like a slight tweak there. This is how ghosts are made, he thought, holding his mother's cold hand. That single flickering look would haunt him for a long time after. Nothing haunted Jasmine though. She was impenetrable. She dared to want things, and when she wanted something, she got it. At times, Nico thought she could reach up into the sky and touch the sun if she simply tried hard enough. In the music clubs, she bloomed into herself, commanded every song, even when they weren't hers to command. But the Ellerins couldn't complain when she turned crowds the way she did. While Jasmine basked in that sort of thing, Nico had in fact thought himself immune to it. He was a Legranda baby, after all. Pleasure was cheap, and he could recognize it the way an art dealer might recognize a counterfeit just from its brushstrokes. If liquor-flushed women threw him a well-timed smile in the middle of a set, he had no desire to smile back, and men, well, those ones didn't smile, so much as glance with meaningful furtiveness, and few really acted upon it for Nico to pay it any mind. But those airless clubs had a way about them, a kind of acidic delight that eroded you so slowly you didn't notice until you were sitting in the dust of your own mistakes. Nico wasn't immune to anything, as he had learned the hard way. In a moment of weakness, he realized he could dare to want things too. This is how ghosts are made. From time to time, they drifted to the surface, losing anchor. The perfumes of Legranda, or his father's elegantly solemn face, or pale hair catching the first rays of daybreak on a stolen morning. The first thing, obviously, is that last passage, I basically cut out some of the excess adjectives that were just making it really convoluted. Like in the first draft, it was like the heady, erotic sense of Legranda. Golden glazed hair. Okay, I don't know what I was on for me to write golden glazed. Like I was truly going a little too crazy. And then the other thing I cut out was the glowing with sleepy joy and half remembered dreams. I don't feel like it was actually contributing too much to the image, so I cut it out. So yeah, in the rewrites, I took out some of the metaphors that I didn't like. I hope those examples made sense. That's kind of all I wanted to talk about today. I'm very curious how you guys feel about purple prose. How do we feel about flowery language? What are your approaches to crafting a metaphor, and what to you is the anatomy of a good sentence? And also share with me some of your favorite passages in books. Like share with me an example of like a flowery passage in a story that you love. Like I would love to know, for all the people that love the flowery writing, I want to know what passages really resonate with you. I shared some from The Great Gatsby, but I would like to know what you guys resonate with, because I do, like I was saying in the beginning of the video, I do think that some of it is subjective, and I would love to know what some of your guys' personal taste in writing is, because it really fascinates me to like get out of my own head. Yeah, that is all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you guys for joining me on this video. I hope all your writing projects are going well. I'll see you guys in the next one.